and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Jez, and I'm thrilled you're joining us today for another fun-filled episode where we sprinkle a little magic on the world of business and leadership. Each week, we dive into fascinating topics that inspire and educate, all while keeping things lighthearted and enjoyable. Magical Learning has been running successfully as a training and facilitation company for over 20 years and has partnered with global thought leaders like Robin Sharma and John Mattone. So whether you're a seasoned leader, a budding entrepreneur, or just curious about how to make learning magical, there's something here for you. So grab your favorite drink, grab a snack, and sit back because it's time for some magical learning. And today it's not just me on the call. We've got a regular team podcast, which means we've got our team members. So Graham, our CEO extraordinaire, you were first on the call. How are you going?
First on the call. That's a first. I am well, Jess. Thank you for asking. Happy that it's Friday. Very grateful that the cooler weather has arrived a little. It's been good. Looking forward to the weekend. Glad to be here.
Very nice. Very nice. We're glad to have you on. And Danette, Director of Learning, Adaptability Specialist, and recording from the mobile recording studio today. How are you going, Danette?
So for those who are watching, I'm in the car. I am in Wagga today. I've come from Junee and the farm this morning. My week's been a week of massive travel. So started in Bowral on Monday, was in Albury on Tuesday, Canberra on Wednesday, home Thursday evening, and now in Wagga today. So we'll be grateful to be home this evening. But a good week in terms of lots of presentations and catching up with people. So yeah, it's great, Jess. How was your week?
My week's been good. We actually haven't recorded for a couple weeks secretly, even though the recording schedule's been as usual. But this week has been good. I've had a stray cat that gave birth to some kittens in our shed, so we've been looking after 4 tiny kittens, which I'll display now on the screen. So if you're watching the video, we highly recommend you jump over to YouTube to check this one out. It's a great way to experience the podcast. And then other than that, I've just been sort of doing a bit of podcast work. I'm back doing my commentary for the Coburg Giants. We're having a good start to the season for all our teams, so that's a positive. But yeah, no, just chugging along. So it's been pretty good. So today we are doing a concept sandbox, and for people that are unfamiliar with that term, I'm about to explain it to you. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a business problem, but we're having a bit of fun with it because we feel like business problems, they exist in the real world, but they can also exist in the fake world, and we can have a bit of fun with it. So we've done ones where we've set business problems in Narnia, in the world of Star Trek, the world of Friday the 13th. And the idea is, you know, any business can have business problems, including some of those ones that may even be at an intergalactic level. And so how can we have fun with those brands, not piss off anybody that we could potentially work with in the future, and have a bit of fun with some ideas here. So I'm going to ask, before we get to what the business problem is, before we get to even today's topic, which is a whole secondary part of this concept sandbox that we'll be using to analyze our business problem. Danette or Graham, did either of you have a little fun context to set this business problem?
Well, I was going to hand it to Graham because I picked Star Trek last time. So Graham, have you got a suggestion? Otherwise, Jez, I'm also interested in your ideas.
Okay.
Star Trek last time, or Star Trek, which is a slightly different scenario. Star Trek. If I was going to go with one, I don't know. If I were going to go with one, it'd probably be Barad-dûr. Yeah,
which
exactly. I pronounce it terribly, but it is the Lord's Tower in Lord of the Rings. At least I think it is. And then we're going to have 216,343 listeners who are going to email in very upset because I got that wrong. But anyway, let's go with where the Dark Lord, where Sauron hangs out when he's at home, just chilling with his homies.
Cool. All right, and that's Lord of the Rings for people that are not as up to date with the director's cuts of the Lord of the Rings. So Sauron, of course, the villain from the Lord of the Rings, the sort of force within the One Ring, and the controller of many of the...
Is he a villain or is he made? He's just misunderstood. Is he being a bit stereotyped? Maybe no, he's a bad guy. Yeah.
Well, I mean, also, I guess today it doesn't really matter because for the purposes of today, he's operating as the CEO of the dark forces in the Lord of the Rings, and this is the business scenario that I was going to suggest. So interesting to see how Sauron deals with this. A main supplier has gone under, and now they have to pick between a cheaper and worse product or a more expensive and better product. So that's the business problem that Sauron is facing. We're going to say that's for steel, for the Uruk-hai, which is sort of their villains, swords and shields. The steel producer's gone under. So they're going to have to determine, do they want cheaper and worse or more expensive and better? They also sell these, let's just imagine, to local areas nearby. So that's going to be their business problem today. But we're not going to talk about that right now because actually the fun of a concept sandbox is we go and have a different conversation and we're going to be coming back to this. So the topic that I had today for everyone to kind of bring something to was the change you'd like to see. Now, this I think is a fun, pretty open-ended conversation. So as part of the Concept Sandbox, we'll be having a conversation around this as well, but then we'll be relaying it back to the steel and manufacturing operations in Mordor. So let's go to Jeanette. I might start with you. Did you have anything that you wanted to bring around the change you'd like to see?
So I have seen in the last little while a lot of fear. So people sort of acting, and how I sort of know that fear's in a room, and I certainly talk about this when I'm doing coaching, is the ego tends to come out in people. So they're like blaming other people or they're judging other people. And it makes for, in terms of the brain science, when we're in fear, it becomes each person for themselves. And if we think about workplaces, we actually want people to work together. So we want them to work in the sort of the thinking part of their brain, which for those that aren't watching the YouTube channel is at the front and the sort of the sides of your brain. So the change I'd like to see is that people learn about their egos and go, okay, that's just my brain trying to protect itself. Is this really, should I be fearful in this situation? Or particularly if I'm a leader, how do I get myself into that beautiful, calm, curious space so my ego sort of is not in the room and we're getting the best out of our people? So mine's really about how do we move people from fear to that more calm, curious space in order that we bring the best of everyone out in the world. Because we're seeing in a whole stack of stages, including business, where people are more fear-driven rather than working with their brain and being calm and curious. So that's the change I'd like to see.
That's a really good one, Danette. Graham, did you have any thoughts on it?
No. Kidding.
Fantastic.
I think it's a great topic. I love that Danette's gone deep with this straight off the bat. We haven't eased our way in. We've just literally nosedived off the top of Mount Doom, funnily enough, straight into the river of lava below, which is where all this fear stuff is just hanging out, waiting for us. My thing I'd like to change was pretty tame by comparison. It was just the St George Illawarra Dragons actually winning the premiership while I'm still alive. That'd be, just a little thing. And for all the playing staff, coaches, etc., involved in the club who are listening to this podcast, a few things really interesting. I mean, we are, in a just that strange space at the moment, semi-serious because it's Friday, so I can't be too serious because otherwise nothing works. My semi-serious thing, which sort of coincides with Danette's in terms of things I'd like to see, because I was looking around my environment thinking, well, is there anything like product-wise? Is there a kitchen, utensil or something that I would like to see change, some material thing? And then I thought, well, rather than bring anything along, I'll just bring me, because I think, and this ties in with Danette's point, that a lot of the time, particularly when we're in fear, when we're stressed, anxious, worried, all of that sort of stuff, we do tend to externalise the cause. So if I'm stressed or I'm upset or I'm worried, it's always because of something that someone else has done, has said, has not done, has not said, etc. So I thought the best place to start in terms of things that I'd like to see change is just me, because it's not normally where we go to. Obviously, I know for those of you who are listening into this podcast or watching the podcast on your preferred platform, clearly you're sitting there looking at this video and thinking, well, perfection's perfection, Graham, just deal with it. And yeah, you're right. But I think, again, our tendency when we feel upset and when we're worried is to look for the cause and the solution outside of ourselves. And going back to Danette's point about, how do we help people become more calm and curious and try and stay in that state, I think a big part of it is firstly accepting that more of the issue around how I feel, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and how I'm showing up as a result. 26.8732% of that, true statistic, I didn't just make that up, is internal. So whilst we would ideally like to be able to blame it on someone else, and if we just get that person to stop doing that or not to call me that or not to whatever it happens to be, instead of looking outside of us for the solution, we do the hard thing, which is to go and look in the mirror. And therein lies our greatest competition, our greatest challenge in life, other than the dragons, which we will move on from now and discuss.
I was going to say, I know you love the Margaret Mead saying of, oh no, it's not Margaret, it's Gandhi one, about be the change you want to see in the world. And I really like your insight that when we're in fear, we tend to externalize it and make it about others. But actually, our greatest growth and the only thing we control is us. So learning to go, how can I show up in this situation in more of that calm, curious manner versus being reactive and blaming it on the environment, the people, whatever. So I really like that. And I'm really excited now for going into the world that we're about to enter and think about how that could help us with the problem we're going to talk. But Jez, interested in your thoughts as well.
Yeah, well, I was going to tie it back a little bit to maybe Sauron and his arms manufacturing. So I think that if we look at what has been talked about, fear, and also how it could be the fear of putting things and then also externalizing things. I think that if Sauron is initially feeling like the smart decision is just to go cheaper to try and hold on to the customers that can already afford it, that may be a decision based in fear. So I think that, perhaps he should think about, like, if that's where his gut instinct is going straight away, the question is that the right decision? Or is this is this kind of a death of one part of that, one era of that sort of business? And are they going to move into the next type of this business? Maybe it's a more refined sword. It's higher quality, longer lasting. It can change kind of what their brand is long term, which I'm sure Sauron's thinking about a lot, is the brand integrity. But I wanted to talk about some things that I think is kind of interesting. One thing around fear that I was thinking about this week was I came up with this different meditation. That's a pretty instant meditation that's good for getting rid of physical anxiety. And it has the very ominous name of a death meditation, but it's not very scary. So what it is if you're feeling a lot of anxiety, you just it's pretty quick. You just close your eyes and you think of the time in your life when you were closest to death, whatever that is. That'll be different for everybody, but there'll be a moment for everybody that was that. And you kind of think of how you were feeling at that moment. And then you think to this current moment and how much stress or anxiety you're feeling. And the thing is, you shouldn't be feeling anxiety anywhere near that because you're not about to die. And that should hopefully contextualize the anxiety a little bit. I found it to be kind of helpful, which is quite good. And then another thing that I've been thinking about is I actually came up with this idea when I was watching basketball as a sort of general principle of basketball coaching, but it's the concept of movement versus stasis, okay? And how much this is going to start as a basketball metaphor, but hopefully I'll land the plane on it. So in basketball, it's best for the defense if there's a lot of stasis. So if no one's moving, that makes it easy for them to set up. And so obviously the counter action to that is just to have a lot of movement, okay? And it makes it more confusing for the defense. But selective stasis within the movement, maybe setting a screen, maybe someone stopping all of a sudden, can create movement from the defense that is the result of your stasis. And I wonder sometimes when you see lots of fear, that's, in my mind, a lot of people staying in stasis while there's movement happening around them. And I think that it could be an idea to join the move, or to move if stasis is not working. And alternatively, if there's too much movement in your life, perhaps stasis is what's required. And I think there's just there's a lot of cost of living pressures and stuff at the moment. And then there's also a lot of global movement. So I think there's a lot of just movement for people that may not necessarily want it right now. So yeah, they've been my kind of thoughts on what we've been talking about so far, I'd say.
I love that, Jez. I was listening, because I've been travelling so much, I've been listening to a couple of different podcasts. And one I listened to was A Diary of a CEO. And he was interviewing a guy who's like attorney. And he's fifth generation attorney. And he was talking about communication skills. And it comes to your sort of point about stasis and then movement. And he said, if we want to communicate better, first of all, stop and breathe in through your nose. So go, and then breathe out and then speak. And so it's like stop, get yourself set, and then move more intentionally. And so I think to your point that when we're in fear, we are holding our breath. So our brain often will want to tick boxes and make quick decisions, which are often really biased and not good decisions. So to stop and actually deliberately breathe, which it helps you get your brain back and think better and be more calm and curious, and then to intentionally think about what decisions should we make. So I think if Soren goes, well, let's just go straight to the cheap and not as good quality, I would imagine without actually exploring the other options, it's probably bias run and it's probably not necessarily in terms of their long-term future a good decision. So I love that idea about the idea of let's stop, but sometimes let's move and then let's stop again and stuff like that. So I love your analogy, Jez. It was great.
Nice. Graham, did you want to add anything to what Sauron might be thinking as a executive in this field?
Thanks. I love the basketball movement versus stasis analogy, and just think about how do we sort of tie that back into Sauron and his mates, the problem they're having with supply chain issues with the major supplier having folded. Where are we going to get decent iron nowadays, boys? But also just thinking about the slightly bigger picture in terms of, because we are ultimately talking about people, and then people in groups in organisations and people on basketball courts, and then don't ask me why, probably because it's Friday. Oh no, it's just me. I got to thinking about Schrodinger's cat, and is it, it's in a box, is it alive or is it dead? Well, it's both until you open the box, and then when you look at it, it'll be one or the other sort of thing. And then I was thinking about, does that also apply? Could we apply that text to somebody who appears to be motionless on a basketball court? Are they moving and stationary at the same time? Yeah, probably. Does it matter? I wonder whether at the moment a lot of Jess, I think the point you made about, I think you made the point. There's a lot of movement globally. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of noise, and that hasn't really changed. There's been so much noise on planet Earth for so long, it's not funny. I don't know if it necessarily gets louder. There just seems to be more voices involved in it, but it's still pretty messy. And I thought, what if we were thinking about this in the context of, Sauron as the leader of an organisation, and they have some goals they want to achieve, whether we agree with them or not, they're valid goals for the organisation. And some of his senior managers, his lieutenants, are trying to lead their people and achieve the outcome, and suddenly they don't have all of the resources they might have. And there's a lot of noise outside of them. They're getting hearing all these rumours about this from their perspective. This Aragorn, and, the guy with the pointy hat running around with his staff, and there's a lot of noise on the outside. How do we pay attention to the noise and the movement? If we go back to the basketball court analogy, excuse me for a second. Sorry. I have a bug. I'm a germ. It's fair to say, Jess, I think if we go back to your basketball analogy for a second. Sorry, folks, hang in there. Please don't hang up on us. This will make sense. I promise, because I'll stop talking in a minute, and then you'll go, oh. Is it fair to say, Jess, just going back to your basketball analogy, that both states, Schrodinger's cat, being in motion and being stationary, are very important in strategy, in the terms of a basketball game? It's probably also fair to say that the players that are on a court at a given point in time, the worst thing they can do is start paying attention to all of the movement or non-movement of players that are not on their court. So if we get distracted by a whole bunch of noise that's happening in a game next door or a game further down the stadium, we can tend to lose sight of what's going on. And I think part of the problem with technology and social media today is that our attention gets dragged onto a court that has really nothing to do with us, isn't necessarily going to affect our state of mind other than to make it worse than it currently is. Doesn't make my life or my job easier. So as a player on a court, am I better just to pay attention to what's in front of me and pay less attention to what's out there? I don't know if that made sense. Discuss.
Yeah. Well, I was actually going to say, Graham, that kind of leads me into my thing I'd like to change, and I think it ties into this, which is also about when there's a lot of movement. If you're a defense, when there's a lot of movement, it's about in some ways sticking to just your principles. If there's going to be a lot of chaos happening, you've got to kind of just have set principles, which is, we want to make sure just to be slightly technical for a second, we might want our biggest person near the basket at all costs. So even if they send everybody out to the 3-point line, we still want our big person in the middle. That's going to help organize everyone else, right? Because everyone will stick to principles regardless of what's happening kind of around them. But I wanted to talk about two quick things that I thought would be changes I'd like to see. I've had two different ideas that I thought could be helpful as a bit more of a guiding principle, because it feels like sometimes all this movement's happening because there's just not really an end goal for the planet, or we're not all unified in our goals, right? It's all kind of all over the shop, and it's a bit sort of blind to the direction it's heading in, so the world is kind of heading in. And I had two different ideas. So one, both kind of hard to find answers to. One was a simple question, which again, weirdly hard to find answers to, which was, what if we just cancelled all global debt? So global debt sitting at about $300 trillion. I don't know when that's getting paid off, and debt is to a lot of degrees pretty made up. Like, it's all disappeared tomorrow. There's no ecosystems that are shutting down. essentially an amorphous concept. And I asked how many people it would help if we just cleared all debt. We just made it a global thing. This has gone too far, even Stephen's time. And it would help about 7 to 8 billion people is the rough approximation. That seems like a good number. So that's a change I'd like to see, and it feels like we could just kind of reset and go from there. And I think everyone would be kind of in a better position. I think because I saw this year, even like for even countries like the US, I think their biggest tax item is their debt repayment now as of this year. So it's a big strain on a lot of different people, countries, organizations, everything like that. And then the other thing, back to Graham, what you were talking about with sort of talking about the how do we organize things? How do we get a board of things we want to achieve? Well, I was also thinking, why doesn't a government just decide to be like the innovation hub and be like, we have these set goals that we are offering a bounty for? So, for example, one might be like, we're offering $3 billion to a company that can give us an effective plan with a small scale example for energy that's under 1 cent a kilowatt, right? So it's just something that we can basically use as a big energy source to help reduce people's costs. So it's using greed in a way as a mechanism to help build a better society in a way, or even or can we, and then when you're competing in that field, you're prioritizing sustainable ones over non-sustainable ones and what have you. So you've got long-term sort of thoughts about it. But that's another thing I was thinking is like you can always determine your values by just setting these goals and then using those as kind of guiding principles as to how you're making decisions as well. And so back to Sauron, what if he just had like, I'd love to sell this many swords, or I'd like to have this many returns, or under for our quality of swords. And these are the set goals that he sets. And so therefore they can make decisions based on those things. What do you reckon?
I like that, Jez, because it's considered. So we're not making reactive decisions. We've set why we're making them. Hopefully it's the long-term sustainable reasons as well. I have literally been listening to a lot of podcasts. Another one that I listened to was, and I haven't finished it yet, but again, it was a Diary of a CEO, but it was the guy who started Snapchat. And to your point, Jez, so when they started Snapchat, they started it with friends and they were testing the product. So I wonder whether part of the returns and stuff like that is actually maybe the cheaper version of the sword, and that is better for what we want. So let's give it to some testers, so clients, etc., stakeholders, to trial what do they see in terms of innovation that we could make with the sword? Is the cheaper material better for the purposes they want? Because maybe they are happy with the cheaper stuff because it works for their one battle. Maybe they're not needing it for 50 battles. Maybe they just think about one. So I like that idea of experimenting to actually get the feedback to go, should we use this feature or not use this feature? And again, in business, if you're not constantly sort of testing things and not just internally, but with those that are actually going to use it, you'll miss some really good opportunities. So I wonder whether that could be part of the solution as well.
Yeah, that's really clever. I like that idea of doing the experimentation, doing both maybe. Yeah, I love it. Good thinking. What do you reckon, Graham?
I think, again, it's a great idea. I wonder whether, just going back to your point or your comment is about one of the things you'd like to change is get rid of global debt. And if we could tag on the back end of that, get rid of capitalism, because it's one of the things that's created so much of it. And even just thinking about products like platforms like Snapchat, and I think I listened to the same podcast, and thinking about the business model that drives a lot of this stuff. Like sitting underneath all of it is a desire to make money rather than a desire to create something that's going to benefit humanity. Because I think if the latter won out, then at some point you might charge enough to cover your costs so that you can afford to continue to pay the people who are building the thing. But after that, you would just say, here it is. And we don't tend to do that as a society. And going back to the whole Sauron versus Aragorn thing, such a typical good versus evil sort of story. And to Danette's point about being clear about what it is that we're actually trying to achieve. So it was how do I literally want global world domination, or do I just want to win this battle? If my goal is just X, I actually just want to own Middle Earth, and then I'll be happy. I'll sit back, relax, take my ugly big crown off, and I'm actually I'm going to chill. Maybe do some death meditation, but hopefully it'll be his version. Sorry, your version, not his. because I think his is a bit scarier. So having some clarity around what we're actually trying to achieve, I think, also helps. And, change we'd like to see. How do we get genuinely more businesses involved in, why don't we just create something that's going to be good for the planet? And let's not worry about trying to make $1 million a minute in profit.
Yeah, very nice. I love it. Well, I think that leads us perfectly into some final thoughts here, Graham, and great reflections there. I might start with you, Danette. Did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation, being the change you want to see, and also what Sauron might consider for the steel business?
So I think whenever we teach our people to become curious versus fearful, we're going to create a change in the world that is better. And the best way to do that is to be the change yourself. So learn to become and curious. And I think for Sauron that, being a little bit playful. So it can be we get quite serious when we have to make hard decisions, but actually having a bit of fun works with your brain and trying a couple of different things, because one of the things the guy said at the Snapchat interview was that about 99% of the ideas that the design team throw out are rubbish, but it leads to the 1% when they're trialing things that is a brilliant idea. So you've just got to trial things, throw ideas out there. And if we're fear-based, our ideas are not as big as if we're more abundant, curious-based. So I love your idea of, what if we wipe out debt? Because debt makes a lot of people really nervous, very fearful. And what if we just trial some other ideas? And even if we don't do that, even if we say to our brain, imagine if, our brain will go, oh, okay, well, imagine if I had no debt and I had sort of all sorts of possibilities. I didn't have to think short term. So if I'm Sarun, I might think the next 5,000 years, what might be the best opportunities we can make with the possibility? And maybe there's a whole stack of different. So it's not just one or the other, because one of the things when we get fearful, we go black and white thinking. So it's either this option or this. Maybe there's a third, fourth, fifth. Who knows? But if we let our people test it and think, we might come up with some brilliant ideas. So that's my share. Great topic. And I love where we went with this. So thank you both.
Yes, thank you very much, Danette, and great insights there, great thoughts. And I think Sauron should definitely consider a bit more fun in the workplace. Doesn't seem like the funnest workplace, so good thinking there to sort of change the culture. Graham, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation being the change you wanted, and what Sauron should consider?
Yeah, I'm sort of a bit concerned about where we ended up, because I don't think you can get an Uber from there back to where you normally would be. Maybe that's not a bad thing. I love Danette's point about trying to have more fun. Again, we know from a brain science perspective that when we're having fun, and typically not at the expense of other human beings, then our entire self works better. It's not just the brain. Every part of us tends to work better when we're in that sort of state. Sauron's a busy man. He's trying to achieve some fairly lofty goals. And if he's having a challenge with part of his supply chain, particularly if he's coming from a fear sort of perspective himself, one of the things that is possible and seems to happen an awful lot is he just tends to push all of that down within the organisation, so all of the people underneath him tend to become more fear-based themselves, and the outcome from that is never particularly good. So I like the idea of how do we have more fun, and we do know from lots of very successful organisations that the teams, the people, the groups that can have fun, that find ways of having some fun whilst they're absolutely smashed work-wise, always do better, always end up with better outcomes. Sauron probably needs to maybe just go and take the helmet off and have a look in the mirror for a while. But I think I'd just come back to the whole, when we're in that place of things I'd like to change, and sometimes the things we like to change are because the things we want to change are things that are making us feel uncomfortable or scared or stressed or angry or whatever it happens to be. And if we change that, then I'll be 100% better. But I am also living proof of the adage that wherever you go, there you are. And I believe that 1,000,000%, So if I'm not happy where I am, I'll just go somewhere else. And, oh, crap, well, that place is terrible just like the last place. So I'll go over there. And, well, they're even ruder people than the other people over here. So all of a sudden I'm stuck in a world where everybody else is a complete dropkick and I'm the only normal person. Apologies to those of you who may be listening or watching from overseas. The dropkick thing may not work. Just Google it or send us an email and we'll explain it. Great topic. Really enjoyed this. I'll stop talking. Thanks, Jess.
Great. No, that great, and great to have your insights today, Graham. As always, a pleasure to have you on. I quickly wanted to share our AI generated image for this one, which is let me just quickly do this. Alrighty, here we go. This is I don't know if you can see this, but this is two orcs selling two swords, and these are the two new swords that they're testing out, and people seem happy in the background. I don't know if people can see that, but anyway, so thank you to Canva for that instant AI generation there. Sauron, there's a little bit of marketing material for you. I think we've done some great magical learning today. It's been very magical, the learning, in my opinion. So thank you both for this, and I think that Sauron's walked out with some great business ideas. I want to thank you both for being on, sharing your stories, sharing your ideas, sharing the context, and sharing some great fun. To all our listeners, thank you so much. Like I mentioned, I think in our last podcast, we were going to be over 5,000 subscribers. That's officially happened, so thank you to everybody that's been sharing. We really appreciate it, and we're glad everybody's enjoying it. And as always, everybody, have a magical week.